All right, we are going to create a vase arrangement. This is a nice frosted glass vase with no floral foam, no chicken wire. We're going to create a grid using foliage and then work our flowers in that'll also create a grid because as you add more stems, they are starting to line together and they're going to hold each other in place so that as you put those last few stems in, they'll all be right where you want them. So let's get started. We're going to start with some euonymus. Make sure that when you're putting foliage and flower stems in a vase, that all foliage below, that would be below the water is removed. So we're going to take all of this off and just put it in our trash can. Sometimes it feels like you're throwing away really good stuff, and if you end up with some pieces that are, 2 or 3 inches long, you can save those to make a smaller arrangement later. The good thing about working in a vase, if you cut a stem and put it in and it's too long, you can take it out, cut a little bit more off and add it back in. But just remember, you can't add stem on. Another good way to check is to turn your stem upside down. And if you want the tip to be about right here, and your tip is touching down there, then you use this as a guideline. You cut there, and then you flip it over. Right in your vase like that. This one just needs a little bit cut off. And there we go. That's going to create our basic grid for our arrangement. Now let's start adding some other plant material. These are spray roses. Spray roses, more than 1 rose per stem. And you can see this has lots of foliage that we need to get rid of. So we're going to strip all of that off the bottom. This little bud, if I were putting this in a big, huge arrangement, I would keep that on there, but since that may end up below water level, we're just going to get rid of that. Then we can come in and do our little trick. Flip it upside down. Start to put our roses in. Now these stems I've already cleaned up just to save time for our video. Give a nice sharp cut with roses. I always try to cut on an angle so there's more surface exposed so they'll take up lots of water. A lot of times with roses we have a problem with the heads bending. It's called bent neck. The stem has become clogged and then they will not take up enough water. So it's important to give them a good clean cut. I usually use a knife. But if you are afraid to use a knife when you're designing, then good sharp clippers are important. All right. Have some roses all the way around. Some people would stop right there and say, oh, that's enough in that vase. But I worked for someone one time that said you're not done until you're overdone. So that's what we're going to keep doing. Add more stuff. This is a fun flower that I use a lot for wedding work. It's called astrantia. It comes in this wonderful burgundy, but it also comes in sort of a creamy white. And I like it because it's sort of lacy, wildflowery looking. It's a great dark color because sometimes we need that punch of dark color in an arrangement. And again, these are multiples on a stem. If I were doing a smaller arrangement, I would cut this apart. But since we're doing one that's a little bit larger, just have this like that, and let that piece sort of hang out the side. And we'll do the same thing over on this side. Like so. Yeah, some Queen Anne's lace. This is what is sold in the floral industry as Queen Anne's lace, but it is not the Queen Anne's lace that we see growing out in the wild. Totally different plants, even though they look similar. This is Amimagus. What we see out there is Daucus carata, that native one. Daucus carata is also the same Latin name as carrots. Because if you were to dig up The Queen Anne's lace in the wild, you would see that it has a tap root. It looks just like a carrot. Whether it's edible or not, I don't know. So don't go out there and start eating those and then call me and tell me you're sick. All right, a little more Queen Anne's lace in here. You ever put those flowers in and the flower stem is twisted and it wants to go the way you don't want it to go, and it never fails. But the good thing about arranging in a vase, you can take it out and rearrange it. Unlike with floral foam, when you put it in there, you should actually leave it where you put it. All right, this is Hypericum. This is a wonderful creamy white variety. I get rid of all the foliage because it doesn't last as long as the berries. So we're looking at all these different colors working together, the different textures working together. I love Hypericum because it comes in a variety of colors. The white and the limey green are both very popular for wedding work. Also various shades of orange and red. No blues or purples, but we've got all those others. There's also a wonderful peach one available that I really like. So you see just a nice open, airy, lacy vase arrangement. This one needs to be cut just a bit shorter. Well, not that short. Let's reach into the bucket and get another one. It was just drooping out a little bit too far. Add this one back in there. That's what I wanted to achieve with that other one that got broken. So there we go, just a nice open, airy vase arrangement with no floral foam. So many people are afraid to arrange in a container with no floral foam, like a vase arrangement, and just arrange using foliage to act as your holder. So you can go one step up if you don't want to go to floral foam and use chicken wire. I've cut this and then formed it into a ball and wedged it down into my container so it's fairly tight. You can also put a piece of the waterproof floral tape around each side and then loop it down and tape it to your container, but don't forget to put another cross piece of tape on there to secure it on each side, and then that way it will be very secure. So I have my container full of water with the chicken wire, and then we're going to create sort of this loose garden style that we see in so many of our trade magazines now. Those of us who have been trained in traditional floral design, this is not real easy for us to break out of our mold and have things that are just sort of loose and floppy. If you want to practice, I recommend using chicken wire to do that and avoiding the floral foam, because the floral foam, when you put stems in, it has a tendency to look very stiff. So with this one, we're going to do chicken wire. I'm going to start off by putting in some of my foliage. This is variegated euonymus, and like I've said before, make sure that stems that are going to be below the water level have no foliage on them. This is also good because if you put something in and you don't like where it is, you can take it out. And I just cut these, so I'm not cutting again, because I know some of you are probably cringing that I've not cut my stems the second time, but I literally just cut them. Linden cypress. Not my favorite landscape plant, but I love it as a foliage because it has that loose, floppy, fern-like appearance, and it works really well in designs. It's one of those that works well year-round as a foliage. With this design, it's not easy because so many of these new designs have a low center and then everything else sort of comes out. So that's what we're going to try to achieve with this, having some stuff going a little bit farther out and then having that low center where those of us who are traditionally trained, where we have our height in the middle and then we fall down to the edge. And that's a little bit difficult sometimes to break out of that traditional mold. As you see there, having that too tall, I need to squish him down a little bit. There we go. This is camellia foliage that I'm putting in now. Nice broadleaf evergreen, again, one that can be used year-round in arrangements. Depends on the flowers that you put with it. So you can certainly use it at Christmas time with lots of reds and whites. It's a wonderful dark green, or you can use some springy colors with it and it looks great. So that's basically how we're going to green that up. I love that the Leland cypress is sort of flopping out of that. Now, we're going to have our weight concentrated down in the center, and that's done a lot with larger flowers, and I've chosen these pincushion protea to be my larger flowers down in the center. I love these. They look artificial. They feel like plastic, but they're a long-lasting, wonderful flower. Let's put one over on this side as well. Let's make this a centerpiece. You can also create this design so it's seen just from one side. Now, let's add in some fluffy stuff. Let's do some hypericum berries. That bright orange color. Tuck that in. Start to go a little bit farther out. And you don't have to be perfectly symmetrical with this. Things can be just slightly askew. Those I'd already taken the leaves off. This one just will strip those leaves. Make it nice and clean to go in there. Let's do this one just a bit longer. Pull this coming out that end, like so. Now let's do some astrantia. Right now, with these colors, this sort of orange and maroon looks very Virginia Tech, which is great for me, but we're going to add some blue to it, so it's going to have sort of that Virginia Tech, University of Virginia combo, because I know there's some households that are combos. Let's have this in here low, fill in, and then we'll add in some other colors as well. Now let's add some of that blue. So bring this delphinium up here a little bit. This is where it starts to get weird because it's like, oh my gosh, a lot of people want to put one right in the middle, but no, we're not going to do that. We're going to hang out to the sides, keep it low in the center. And if you can find some things that have crooked, curvy stems, that's even better. Things that are loose and sort of floppy, and it makes this design much easier to create. See, don't you just want to put one right there in the middle to build that up? But not with this style. We're not going to do that. So in order to get some of that blue into the center though, I am going to cut this into a couple of pieces. Just cutting that out like that. Now I have this nice fat piece that I can put down low in my arrangement, so we just don't have some blue wings hanging out in the arrangement. We're going to get this blue down in the center as well. But again, we want to keep it low. Like that. And then over on this side, I'm going to strip some of these lower flowers off. And then this can be tucked down on this side, just so you have that hint of blue all the way through your arrangement. Now, to make some people twitch, we're going to add some hot pink to this. Hot pink and orange, I think, work well together. There are other people who argue and say, oh, absolutely not. But I love pink and orange. Throw a little bit of yellow or lime green, and I think it works great. These are Matsumoto asters. Multiples on a stem. They're a great replacement for mums in an arrangement, because mums sometimes are so stiff, where the asters are a little bit softer and a little bit floppier than the mums. And the thing about putting a flower stem into this container with the chicken wire, when you put it in, if the flower is heavier on one side, it sort of turns. And you may want to put it like this, and it just sort of turns over like that. Unlike with floral foam, when you put it in, it stays there, usually. Putting a few up in the air so they sort of dance above the arrangement. I've noticed in a lot of the designs that I see in trade magazines, Instagram, that is the thing, having some flowers sort of dancing above your arrangement and not everything packed down so tight. Just letting them dance up, because sometimes I see photographs, I'm like, oh my gosh, why is that flower way up there? I just want to take it down into the arrangement. But that is the new style. It makes me twitch a few times, but I'm getting used to it and starting to actually like that look. And I think we're about finished, because it's getting difficult to put stems in because they've all crisscrossed down there below that chicken wire. So, and then we are good with that. So keep the center low, have a few things dancing above, and don't be afraid to flop out on the sides. This arrangement we're going to do very sculptural, more vertical. This is a metal container that looks like wonderful pottery, but it's metal. And I'm using a piece of floral foam in there that's completely saturated, not taping it down because it's wedged in tightly, so we don't need to tape it to the container. So with this one, we're going to start with our vertical line first, and I'm going to use some of this wonderful iris foliage. Give that a nice cut. Sometimes with foliages like this, rather than cutting it at an angle like I do my flower stems, I cut it straight across, and it creates more or a better surface for insertion, because when you cut it on an angle, these edges are a little soft, and then you'll end up with a soft tip and it won't insert into the foam. So I'm going to cut it straight across, insert it. And this is going to be one that's going to be seen basically from 3 sides and not all the way around. So I'll rotate this around as I'm creating so that you can see what I'm doing. Putting my foliage near the back. Like so. 3 different heights. Now let's add some foliage near the front and center. I've chosen some Akuba that is the solid green. This is great to use in arrangements. Also love the variegated Akubas as well. And I've made arrangements with Akuba, and it's actually rooted in my arrangement. So they're a great one to use, and then you can recycle them by planting them out in the garden. So I've created sort of a green skirt around the base of this. Now let's add some height with our blue delphinium to give it a splash of color. Like with the iris foliage, with the delphinium, I'm going to vary the height on each of those, sort of stagger it. Like so. And we'll add a few more to that to create this nice blue backdrop. Blue is one of those colors in arrangements that if it's seen from a distance, if it's not brightly lit and there's a dark background, the blue is going to disappear in the arrangement. So just be aware of that if you're using blue. If you're using lots of foliage and you put that blue in there and you step 20 feet away, the blue will just disappear and it'll be a black hole in your arrangement. So avoid that, especially for podiums and altars and that type of thing. So we've got our iris foliage, and then we have our delphinium to create that sort of backdrop. Now let's come in with some more blue, some nice hydrangeas. And most of the time I take the hydrangea foliage off. Sometimes I'll take it down just till there are a couple of little ones left and leave those on. Hydrangeas can be a problem in floral foam sometimes. They don't want to last. Sometimes I use quick dip, which is a hydrating solution. Just dip the cut stem in there for a few seconds and then put it into your foam, and it will hold up really well. I've had it last for a week. Other times I've used alum. Garden club friends have told me that alum works really well on hydrangeas. I've used it and then sent the flowers off to a wedding or a party, and I don't know how long they lasted. I need to experiment and do that at home sometime. So if you have some alum, that's just pickling alum that you can pick up at the grocery store, it's great to use that in your arrangement for the hydrangeas. help them drink up the water. All right, more big leaves we need to get rid of. And sometimes hydrangeas need just a little shake to loosen them up. These came from the florist, not out of my garden, even though my hydrangeas this year in the garden were beautiful. And I've actually dried a lot of them that I plan to use for Christmas decorations. And I've dried them by putting them in a vase with just a little bit of water in the bottom. I cut them late summer, about an inch of water or less, let them drink it up, and then they dried perfectly in the vase and held their blue color. Others were green, some had turned from green, got that hint of pink on them, and they dried beautifully. Then there were a few that didn't dry, so they got tossed in the compost pile, but then I got those really good ones to keep. All right, let's add some green. This is dianthus, the variety is called Trick. It looks like green moss. It's one of my favorites, long lasting. It will dry and turn a pale sagey green, but it is a great one. Related to carnations because they are dianthus. If you look at the stems, it looks just like a carnation or a sweet william. And I'm grouping these together just like I grouped my hydrangeas together. Like so. Now we need to add what really inspired me to do this arrangement, some peacock feathers, because these are the colors of the peacock. If you look at that. So let's add a few of those, make it dance a little bit. That has a curve to it. We'll save that for a curved ridge. Let's go with a straight one, put that in there. Never fails. If you have one that you want to use, it's curved the wrong way, all kinds of crazy stuff. And you get this peacock feather eyes just in the right spot so they're looking at you. And feathers are expensive, unless you know someone who raises peacocks or other birds. You need to have your big pocketbook with you when you go to buy feathers. That's starting to take shape. I need a little more green in the back. So this is some fat chaturra. That's just going to back up what we already have in there, and you'll see bits and pieces of it through there, but it's not going to be a focal point, but it's backing up our arrangement. It's important to finish off the back of your arrangement. So often I see people just leave them naked, and you don't want to do that. You want to have some kind of foliage on the back to finish them off. So now you can see I've finished off the back, and a little more blue. These are daylily scapes that I painted blue. So as you're cleaning up your garden, if you have some daylily scapes that have dried on the plants, just take those off, get your can of your favorite spray paint and paint them. These would be great painted gold or silver and tucked into a Christmas tree to create some textures there that look almost like deer antlers. So you can paint them brown and have little reindeer if you want. So we're gonna add a few of those in here just to give a little bit of extra texture. I'm going to spin it around in just a second so you can see what I've added in. think we need that one up there. Sometimes you have to step back from your arrangement and look at it and see what's going on. So there we have our completed design with peacock feathers as inspiration, and I've chosen colors to go with that. It is time to make a woodland centerpiece, and for my inspiration, during one of my walks recently, I found this wonderful bark that had fallen off the neighbor's tree. It was just laying at the end of the driveway. There's a much bigger piece that I have at home to use for later, but I thought, why should I let that go to waste and go to the dump or the compost pile when I can pick up these pieces and then use them in a flower arrangement? So I have a whole box of them at home, and I'm excited about it. I've taken my heavy Felco clippers and just clipped across the bottom so that I have a nice straight edge there to insert that into the foam, like that. So I'm going to make this look like some type of garden sculpture almost. Away from the tape. It's just a low plastic design tray with 2 blocks of floral foam that I've taped in securely with the waterproof tape, and I've gone all the way around twice to make sure that it's secure, because this is pretty heavy. So the backside looks a little bit different, but that's okay. I tell people all the time, if you're creating a centerpiece, as long as there's interest on both sides, it doesn't have to be the exact same on both sides. Let's come in and add some foliage. I'm going to add some variegated akuba. Cut that short, tuck it down in here. Since this is a low design tray, I could put foliage down at the edge and it can just lay right out on the table, and we don't have to worry about seeing a container. Sometimes you want to have a container that will show off, but then other times it just needs to disappear, like this one. The way I'm putting this in, there's no rhyme, reason, or exact pattern to this. I'm just mixing it up, so we want it to look sort of like a woodland garden. Another good foliage to use would be poet's laurel, also known as Italian ruscus in the floral industry. This is way too big to put in here, so I'm just going to cut this apart. And I know that makes some people cringe when you start cutting expensive foliage like this apart. But if you cut it down into smaller pieces, then it can be used in a design this size. And this has wonderful fruits on there that are just starting to turn. These were a bright limey green, and now they're going to turn a nice bright orange for fall. They will drop in the garden, and then you'll get new ones. But be very patient, because it takes a couple of years for them to germinate. I forgot about that. I saved some one time from a design, threw them in my garden, and then a couple of years later, these wonderful bright dark green leaves that were very glossy, just a fat leaf, didn't look like this. And I thought, you know, I'm going to leave that alone because I think it may be something important. And sure enough, some of these smaller leaves started to show up, and I ended up with my nice little baby poet's laurel. Well, ended up selling that house, and who knows the size of that plant now, but it's very slow growing. I tell people all the time, that's why it's so expensive in the nurseries, because it is a slow grower. Right, that's our base for the foliage. We can come back and add a little bit more of the landscape foliage, but I have some ornamental cabbage from the florist. I'm going to take these lower leaves off because I'm going to plant these in my woodland garden. Cutting these very short, and the stems are so fat, I'm going to whittle them down a little bit, decreasing that fatness so that I can have some little cabbages in the garden. These are great in arrangements, but if you've ever cooked cabbage, you know there's a little fragrance that comes with them. And after about a week or so, you'll notice that this arrangement is going to start to smell pretty bad. So just keep that in mind if you're using the ornamental cabbage, ornamental kale in your designs, that they can start to get a little fragrant. Now, if I were doing a great big arrangement, I would keep those stems long, but since we're doing this a little more compact, I'm going to cut these stems short. Let's start to work some of this in over on this side. Do one more out on this end. This just happens to have a nice curved stem, so we're going to put it on this end and let it sort of curve out of the woods. Give these a little bit of a fluff to open them up. These are really fresh, so they're still fairly tight. If you can't find cut ornamental cabbage and kale, you can buy the potted ones in the garden centers. Just take it out of the pot, cut down below the soil level, and then clean off any of those excess roots and put them right in your flower arrangement. I've done that before when I couldn't find these that I needed for a nice design. We're going to use the trick dianthus to look like moss. That's going to cut really short and then put right against the floral foam. Look like little bits of moss in the woods. You could use actual sheet moss in this, but this trick dianthus is much neater and doesn't make a big mess all over the place. I see that my foam is completely saturated because as I've pushed all these fat stems in, we're starting to spring a leak over there. So if you're watching this, don't worry, I'm well aware of it. We'll be okay. Little groups of that trick dianthus in there to make it look like moss down at the bottom. We need to hide that floral foam, so I'm going to continue doing that with some hydrangea. And I'm not going to put this big piece in there. This is one that they refer to as antique because it's end of the season kind of look where it's going from white to green and then that hint of pink. So it makes some people cringe when I do this, but this gets cut apart. Then we end up with these nice little fat pieces that we're going to tuck in low in this arrangement to help cover up the foam. If you're making lots of centerpieces, this is a great way to cover foam, get some hydrangeas, cut them apart, and then you don't have to use quite as much foliage. It gives a really nice look. Like so. This one is so branchy, I'm going to cut that even more. It's a big piece. And the same thing with this one. It's big enough that I can cut another section out, and I can use that in a couple of spots. Now, let's add some hypericum berries. Using the white ones, keeping this all sort of greens, whites, soft pinks. And by putting those berries in front of that piece of bark, then that light shows up nicely against the dark background. And we'll do some of the same thing on this side. This is something I would use on a small buffet table and not necessarily on a dinner table. If you were doing this on a dinner table, I would just cut the bark down shorter so that you can have that and just make the arrangement even more compact. Then we're going to put a little bit of Queen Anne's lace in there. Let that start to dance above just a little bit. And look at that stem. Sort of zigzag. That's one that would drive me crazy making a design. That's the way it's growing, so that's the way we're going to use it. We need to put a little bit more foliage around this base just to cover up our mechanics. Reach over, grab some stuff here. The camellia is a perfect one to do that. Nice broad evergreen leaves, covers up mechanics. And I didn't want to green this too much at the beginning because I was afraid I wouldn't have room for my other plant material, especially since I was dealing with some things that had fat stems like the ornamental cabbage. So go back and add more foliage at the end to finish off the arrangement. Some of the camellia has nice buds on it, so it's always great to show those. Like that bud, it's right down there. It's nice to see that in the arrangement. This one has a nice bud on it as well, so we'll make sure that is seen. I think we're good. Then I have one other thing to add in. That's a little bit of this broom corn. Also known as just broom. That creates just a little bit different texture in there. The greens and the browns play off of the bark and then all the other foliages and things that are in the design. Even though I think it's finished, I need to add one more because I have friends who have been and are in the Ikebana Society, and even though this is not an Ikebana arrangement by far, they always told me never use 4 of anything, so I have to add a 5th one. So that's going to go over here. We'll just tuck that in really short, and there we go, our completed woodland garden.